They wrote his name with silence. Not with ink. Not with stone. No statues bore his face. No cathedral held his bones. No child learned his victories in school, for there were none to count. Yet every war he entered ended differently when he passed through. They called him Oldel, and they called him late. He was not born into war. He was born into snow, the kind that buries fences and children alike, the kind that silences dogs, the kind that teaches patience. His father was a monk who no longer believed in heaven, but still folded his hands when thunder came. His mother died with her eyes open, staring at the door that never opened again. He learned to walk by falling forward, always into wind. He learned to listen by watching lips, not trusting ears. And he learned what most men never do. You can win a fight without lifting your hands, but you won't be thanked for it. He enlisted at 17. Quiet. Narrow-shouldered. No ambition. The captains overlooked him. The officers forgot. The drill masters barely raised their voices when he made mistakes, because he didn't make them twice. They said he had no fire. But when he was sent to his first campaign, the men came back speaking of him in strange tones. Not admiration. Not spawn. Something else. Respect made of discomfort. They said he didn't scream when men died. They said he didn't flinch when arrows flew. They said he once held a dying man's throat for 2 hours just to ease the gasping. And when they asked him why he did it, he said, because no one else would. Aldhelm was promoted. Not quickly. Not loudly. He passed from company to company like mist through trees. Each time he left, the men said less, but they remembered more. Not his face. Not his orders, but the way silence followed him. Not empty silence. Not cold, but the kind that follows restraint, and the kind that hums just before the cry. He first became known to the court during the border cleansings of the north. The king, Marianir, a man, raised on doctrine and steel, had declared the northern trade cities impure, overrun with bloodless allegiances, foreign prayers, and soft merchants unwilling to kneel. Aldhelm was tasked to raise the city of Breva. He arrived with 2 regiments. The king expected it done in 3 days. Aldhelm waited at the river bank for 5. The men asked why they had not crossed. He pointed at the trees. They said, "There are no enemy forces there." He said, "No. But there are children." He waited 2 more days. The enemy fled without battle. The city was taken. The only flame came from hearths. The only blood from sheep. When the news reached the capital, the king was furious, until his advisers whispered, "The city is ours, and so are the trade routes." Aldhelm received no commendation. But he received something rarer. He was left alone. He became a general after the 6th Eastern Rebellion, not because he led the final charge, but because he refused to. The rebel soldiers had taken a farming city hostage not for strategy, but for food. The other generals had already begun surrounding the fields, preparing a siege. Aldhelm walked into the city alone, unarmed, and requested to speak to the leader. They talked for 7 hours. When he left, the rebels surrendered the next morning. He gave no terms, only bread. The captains called it absurd. The council called it risky, but the farmers called it wisdom. And they named their next child Older. That was the beginning of his exile into command. Each victory made without blood brought him further from the court's favour. Each city spared became a quiet accusation to the others who did not spare theirs. He was winning wrong. And wrong winds embarrass kings. He began to receive stranger orders. Cities too far to reach. Prisoners already dead. Forces he could not rally. But he obeyed, always with a pace too slow, a silence too long. He let the war breathe. And in that breath, it softened. The men beneath him changed. At first, they came for glory. They left confused. Then came the ones who had seen too much. They stayed. They learned to walk slower. They learned to fire last. They learned that sometimes the strongest line was not drawn in blood, but in waiting. Old Elm made enemies, not on the battlefield, but in the marble rooms of power. The king grew colder. The maps grew redder. And still Old Elm's campaign rolled on like fog, unstoppable, untouchable, unglorified. One noble whispered at court, "He is a soldier who fights gravity, not men." Another said, "He doesn't win wars. He erases them." But neither dared speak aloud what they feared most. He was making a different kind of peace. One that didn't need flags, or kings, or statues, just memory and time. That winter, Old Helm received his final command. Take the city of Carth. He did not. He took his men to the forests instead. They built no camps. They sharpened no blades. They just waited. And when the enemy passed them by, chasing phantom threats, Old Helm returned to his map and drew a circle around nothing. Then he folded it and slept. When spring came, the war was technically over. No one declared it. No treaty was signed. The battles just stopped coming. There were no drums, no bells, just fewer bodies on the road, and fewer names missing from letters. Old Elm returned to a village no one had touched. He never called it home. He never wore his uniform again. He spent his days fixing gates, feeding dogs, writing things no one read. When children asked what war was, he said, "A loud way to forget what matters." And when they asked what he was, he said, "Late." Then he smiled, and they never asked again. The war ended quietly. That was the first problem. People didn't know how to mourn without smoke. They didn't know how to cheer without graves. The story lacked a crescendo. It ended like a letter no one finished writing, and because it had no signature, no one knew who to thank or who to blame. When peace comes too softly, suspicion fills the silence. The ministers began to whisper that Old Helm had delayed final orders, that he had misreported enemy numbers, that he had allowed surrender without oversight, a phrase that meant nothing and everything in the mouths of politicians. He was summoned, not to celebrate, but to account. The court hadn't seen him in 5 years. They expected a withered ghost of a man. What they got was worse. He looked unbroken, not defiant, not proud, just whole. And that frightened them. The hearing was public. The charges vague. Deviation from operational expectations. Unauthorized command pacing. Failure to produce measurable conquest. The room was packed with grey-robed men and red-faced barons. A few soldiers stood at the edges, their uniforms loose, their hands scarred. They looked at Old Helm not like a general, but like a question they didn't know how to answer. The king was gone. His successor, a tired-eyed boy named Ranulf, barely remembered the war. "We," asked Old Helm one question. "Why did you never take the capital of Carth?" Old Helm replied, "Because no one was defending it. And yet you didn't enter. It was already empty. Then you could have taken it symbolically, a pause. They do not wage war on symbols. They had no legal grounds to convict him, but they had narrative grounds to erase him. So they did. They stripped him of rank, reassigned all surviving records to other names, declared his service tactical support, an insult wrapped in politeness, and then they stopped saying his name. He left the capital the next morning. No horses, no salute, just footfall in dust, and the knowledge that silence had once again become his ally. The village he returned to had no name. He never asked it. He planted herbs. He repaired broken fences. He taught boys how to carve wood without splinters. And when people asked what he had done in the war, he said, "I kept time from devouring itself." And that was enough. But memory is a predator. It circles, reaps, and when it finds the softest place, it enters. 10 years passed. A new war began. Not on the same fields, not with the same flags, but with the same hunger. New generals, younger, louder, cleaner. They marched as if peace had been a shame, as if Aldhelm's refusal had been a kind of surrender that needed to be reversed. They sent scouts to the north. They found the village. They asked about the old man. The children lied. They said he was dead. But the scouts saw the garden, and the fence, and the books, all handmade, stacked beside the hearth. They left, but others followed. Soon, an officer returned, not in uniform, but in memory. She had once served under Aldhelm. A map maker, 17 when she enlisted. Quiet. Precise. Afraid of horses. Now, she wore command, but without ease. She found him in the garden. He did not greet her. He just handed her a peach. She sat. She cried. They spoke until sundown. She said, "They're trying to reframe it." He said, "They already have." She said, "They've rewritten your orders. You're not in the books." He said, "Then the books are lighter." She said, "What should I do?" He said, "Teach them to lose something without needing to replace it." She left a week later, but not before writing his name into the back of her boot, just beneath the heel, so she could step with it and not forget. More came, not to find him, but to remember what forgetting costs. They brought no flowers, only questions. Is it true you spared the enemy? Did you really wait 7 days before marching? Why didn't you take the crown when they offered it? He answered none of them. Instead, he asked, "Are you ready to listen?" And if they said yes, he told them stories. Not about war, but about bread, about thunder, but about the time he met a blind boy who taught him how to hear differently. And when they left, they said thank you. And he never asked for what. One autumn, a statue was built in the capital. It bore no face, only a line to the silence that slowed the sword. The ministers called it abstract, but in villages like his, people called it Aldhelm, not as name, but as verb. To Aldhelm, something to refuse the harm it demands. When he died, no one noticed, until the bells rang differently, not louder, not slower, just once, then pause, then once again, the rhythm of restraint. His grave was shallow, by his own request. No stone, just a tree, and under the tree, in soil too cold for roses, someone planted thyme, because it grows slowly. But it never dies, and if you pass through that village today, and if the wind is soft, you might hear a voice that says, "The only victory worth keeping is the one that makes no orphans." And when you look around and see no one, you'll understand, that's the sound of someone who refused to win and still did. They found the box by accident. It had no label, no catalogued, just a cracked leather corner and twine that dissolved at the first touch. The intern who opened it sneezed twice from the dust. Inside, nothing of value, or so it seemed. A map of a town that no longer existed. A letter written in a cipher no one had used in 200 years, and at the very bottom, folded so tightly it had split along the crease, a field report, dated during the war. Signed by no one. But in the margin, scrawled in ink so faint it bled into the parchment, one name, Aldhelm. The intern showed the archivist. The archivist blinked once. Then, twice. Then whispered, "I thought they erased him." The intern asked, "Who?" She said, "A man who made peace too quietly." Weeks passed. The file moved through layers of silence up the ladder of historical bureaucracy, where each rung is greased with forgetfulness. No one objected. No one cared. But the archivist cared, and that was enough. She began to piece it together. From the soldiers' journals no one had ever quoted. From maps with arrows drawn and then scratched out. From minutes of council meetings with missing, ages all missing the same name. And from a single letter found beneath a floorboard in a chapel, where a child had once written, "He told us not to be brave, he told us to be kind." And it worked. The archivist built no case. She made no press release. She did what he would have done. She planted. Quietly, In a footnote of a chapter about military reform, she added, strategies echoing the rhythm of General of the North Campaign. In a museum exhibition about war correspondence, she tucked a letter in the corner unlabeled, unlit but reachable. In a textbook on leadership, she added a quote in the margins, sometimes the best command is waiting until others stop shouting. Children noticed. They always notice the things adults hide in plain sight. One child asked her, why don't they teach about him in school? She said, because peace doesn't need applause. And the child said, but it deserves a story. So the child wrote one. A play, badly staged. The general was laid by a girl in her brother's coat. The army was made of cardboard horses. The battle was invisible. And the final line was, we didn't win, we just stayed. And that was enough. A teacher filmed it. Posted it online. Some scoffed. But one soldier retired wrote in the comments, I remember marching under a man like that. I don't remember his face. But I remember how the silence changed. Years later, no one remembered who first told the story, but someone always knew it. It passed from teacher to poet to mourner, to singer. They called it the quiet general. Sometimes all dull, sometimes not. But always the man who walked behind war and swept up the ash. And when they retold it, they added their own endings. Some said he became a gardener. Some said he wandered into myth. Some said he was never a general at all, just a man with good timing. And none of it mattered. Because in every version, one thing remained. He refused to win the way they asked him to. And in doing so, he